There are places in this world that do not want to be found. Not hidden exactly, not secret, just forgotten on purpose. Left off the maps because the people who drew those maps knew better. The Ozarks have plenty of those places. Deep folds in the hills where the creeks run cold even in August, where the timber grows so thick the sunlight turns green before it ever touches the ground. Places where you could walk for days and never cross a road, never hear a voice, never see a single sign that anyone had been there before you. Except sometimes you do, and that changes everything. Before I get into this, let me ask you something. Have you ever been somewhere and felt, with absolute certainty, that you were not supposed to be there, not trespassing, not breaking a rule? Something deeper than that, like the land itself was telling you to leave. If you have, drop it in the comments. I want to know. Because what happened to Orin Wickgrove in the fall of 1927 is one of those stories that sits with you for a long time after it ends. Orin was 38 years old, a timber surveyor out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. Lean, weathered, with a jaw like a fence post and hands so rough they caught on everything he touched. He had deep-set eyes the color of creek mud, always narrowed against the light, and a way of standing perfectly still when he listened to something. People said he looked like a man carved out of the same hills he walked through. He kept his dark hair cut short and wore the same pair of lace-up boots he had been wearing for the better part of 6 years, risoled twice, cracked at the toe. He was not the kind of man who spooked easy. He had spent the better part of 15 years walking through timber country, measuring land, marking trees for the mills. He knew these hills the way most people knew the rooms of their own house. But in October of 1927, the Caro Lumber Company sent him into a stretch of the Ozarks he had never surveyed before, a parcel of land east of what the locals called Briar Notch, about 40 miles from the nearest proper town. His job was simple enough. Walk the boundary, estimate the board feet, file the report. 3 days, maybe 4. He had done it 100 times. Orin packed light, a canvas rucksack, a compass, a folding knife, dried beef and hardtack, a canteen, a wool blanket rolled tight and strapped to the bottom of the pack. He carried a pocket watch his father had given him, brass and heavy, with an inscription on the back that read simply, "Walk steady." He also packed a small tin of matches, a coil of twine, and a stub of pencil with a leather-bound ledger he used for field notes. He left Fayetteville on a Tuesday morning, drove his truck as far as the road would take him, which was a narrow logging trail that petered out at a washed-out creek crossing, and then he started walking. The first few hours were unremarkable. The forest was dense, mostly oak and hickory, with thick underbrush that clawed at his boots. The ground rose and fell in long, rolling swells. Birdsong filtered through the canopy. A woodpecker hammered somewhere to the north. Squirrels chattered in the branches overhead. The air smelled like damp earth and rotting leaves and the faint sweetness of wild persimmon. It was the kind of walk Orin had taken 1,000 times before, and his body moved through it on autopilot while his mind ran the numbers. Board feet per acre, trunk diameter, canopy density, the quiet arithmetic of timber. He followed the creek bed northeast, just as the company map indicated, and made good time. By mid-afternoon, he had reached the first boundary marker, a rusted iron stake driven into a limestone outcrop. He noted it in his ledger, checked his compass, and kept moving. The second marker was supposed to be 2 miles due east. He walked for 3 miles and never found it. That was the first thing that did not sit right. Orin was not the kind of man to miss a marker. He double-checked his compass. He retraced his steps. He walked a wide arc, scanning the tree line, looking for the telltale gleam of iron and stone. Nothing. The land just kept going. Thick timber, no clearings, no sign of human presence at all. He told himself the marker had been pulled, maybe by scrappers or by animals rubbing against it. It happened. He made a note in his ledger and decided to press on and pick up the third marker instead, which should have been another 1.5 miles northeast. That was the second thing. He walked for what felt like 2 miles, maybe more, and the terrain changed in a way he had not expected. The oaks gave way to something older, heavier, trees he could not name with bark so dark it looked almost black, and roots that ran above the ground in thick, tangled knots. The underbrush thinned out and then disappeared entirely. The ground beneath his boots was nothing but a thick carpet of dead leaves, dark and damp, that made no sound when he stepped on them. The air got cooler, not a breeze, just a stillness that sat against his skin like damp cloth. And the birds stopped. Now, Orin had spent enough time in the woods to know that silence happens. Animals go quiet when a hawk passes over. Squirrels freeze when a fox moves through. But this was different. This was not a pause. It was an absence, like everything that lived in those trees had packed up and left without telling anyone. The woodpecker was gone. The squirrels were gone. Even the insects, the constant background hum of crickets and cicadas that you stop hearing after a while because it is always there, even that was gone. He stopped walking. He stood still. He listened. Nothing. Not a cricket. Not a breeze in the canopy. Not a branch settling. Just his own breathing and the soft creak of his pack straps and the faint tick of his pocket watch against his chest. He checked his compass again. The needle was steady. Northeast. He kept walking. The trees grew denser. The trunks were wider here, some of them 4 or 5 feet across, with bark that was ridged and furrowed like old skin. He put his hand against one as he passed. It was cold, not cool, the way tree bark is cool on a shady day. Cold, like touching a stone that had never seen sunlight. By the time the light started failing, Orin had covered what he estimated to be 7 or 8 miles from the truck, and he had not found a single additional boundary marker. He had not crossed a trail, a fence line, or even a creek. The ground had flattened into a long, shallow valley, and the timber had grown so dense overhead that the fading sky was barely visible through the canopy. He decided to make camp. He cleared a small patch of ground at the base of a wide, dark-barked tree, rolled out his blanket, and ate a strip of dried beef. He chewed slowly, the way he always did in the field, making each piece last because you never knew when you would need what was left. He did not build a fire. Later, he could not explain why. He had matches. He had dry wood within reach. There was no reason not to build one, but something in him said no. Something that sat right below conscious thought, a weight in his chest that told him light would be the wrong thing to put into this darkness. It was the kind of instinct he had learned to trust over 15 years in the woods. The body knows things the mind does not. And his body was telling him to be still, to be quiet, to be small. He lay down, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and closed his eyes. He did not sleep, not because he was afraid, not yet, because the silence was wrong. In 15 years of sleeping in the woods, he had never heard nothing. There was always something, an owl, a coyote, the rustle of a possum in the leaves, the distant bark of a farm dog. But that night, in that valley, there was only the sound of his own heartbeat and the slow passage of air in and out of his lungs. He lay there for hours, staring up at the blackness of the canopy, and at some point, near what he guessed was midnight, he became aware of something else. A smell, faint at first, like damp stone, like the inside of a root cellar that had been sealed too long, not unpleasant exactly, but heavy. It settled over him gradually, the way fog moves into a hollow, and it carried with it a coldness that had nothing to do with the October air. This was a cold that came from below, from deep below. The kind of cold that rises out of caves and mine shafts and wells, the kind that smells like earth and time and things that have never been touched by wind. Orin lay still. He did not open his eyes wider or turn his head. He just breathed, slow and controlled, and waited. The smell thickened, and with it came a sound, so faint he almost missed it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like a fingernail on wood. Tap, 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 slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere to his left, maybe 20 yards out, maybe less. He did not move. He did not reach for his knife. He just lay there, breathing, listening, and waited for morning. The tapping stopped after what felt like an hour. The smell faded sometime after that. And when the first gray light of dawn seeped through the canopy, Orin got up, rolled his blanket, and walked over to where the sound had been coming from. There was a tree there, one of the dark-barked ones, wider than the rest, with a trunk that split about 8 feet up into 2 heavy limbs that reached outward like arms. And on the bark, at about the height of a man's chest, there were marks, not scratches, not animal marks, lines, thin, deliberate lines carved into the bark in a pattern that repeated over and over. He could not tell what it was supposed to be. It was not letters. It was not a picture. It was just a pattern, tight and precise, like something someone had spent a very long time making. The lines ran in parallel rows, curving slightly, intersecting at odd angles, forming shapes that almost meant something but never quite resolved into anything recognizable. He touched it. The grooves were deep, old. The bark had started to grow back over them in places, which meant they had been there for years, maybe decades. But the edges were clean. Whoever or whatever had made them had used something sharp and hard, something that cut through bark the way a chisel cuts through wood. He counted the trees he could see from where he stood. 7 of them had the same marks, all at the same height, all with the same pattern. And this is where the story starts to turn, so let me pause here for a second. This story is brought to you by Behind Dark Tales. If you are enjoying this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep making these, and if you happen to be hearing this on some other channel, that means they stole it from us without permission. Report it for us. We appreciate it more than you know. All right, back to Orin. He should have turned around that morning. He knew it. He said as much later to the few people he ever told this story to. He should have taken his compass, pointed it southwest, and walked straight back to his truck. But he was a surveyor. Curiosity was his trade. And those marks on the tree bothered him in a way he could not put into words. They were too precise to be random, too strange to be practical. They were put there by a person or by something, and that person or thing had been in these woods, in this silence, in this place that felt like it had been left alone for a very long time. So he kept walking northeast. The second day was worse. The terrain dropped into a narrow ravine, steep-sided and choked with deadfall. Fallen trees lay across the path like bones, gray and stripped of bark, tangled with vines and moss. The dark bark trees were everywhere now, crowding out the oaks and hickories entirely. Their canopy was so dense it turned the ravine into a kind of tunnel, dim and close, where the air hung still and the light came through in thin, dusty shafts. The air stayed cold, even when the sun climbed high enough to send those thin blades of light down through the canopy. And the silence held. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the crunch of his own boots on the leaf litter and the occasional crack of a branch under his weight. Every sound he made felt loud, intrusive, like speaking in a church. He found more marks. On tree after tree, always at the same height, always the same tight, repeating pattern. Some were old, almost swallowed by new growth, the bark closing over them like skin over a wound. Others looked fresher, the grooves clean and pale against the dark bark, the wood still bright where the cuts had been made. Whoever was making them had been coming back over and over for years. Around midday, he came across something that stopped him cold. A clearing, not large, maybe 30 feet across. Circular, almost perfectly so, as if the trees had simply decided not to grow there. The ground was bare, no grass, no moss, no leaves, just hard-packed earth, pale gray, smooth as a tabletop. It looked like clay that had been baked by sun, except no sun reached this place. The tree line formed a perfect ring around it, those dark trunks standing shoulder to shoulder like sentinels. In the center of the clearing, there was a stone, not a boulder. A stone, roughly rectangular, about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, flat on top, set flush with the ground. It looked like it had been placed there, deliberately, carefully. The edges were too straight to be natural, too uniform. It sat in the center of that bare earth like an altar or a table, or something meant to hold what was placed upon it. Orin walked around the edge of the clearing. He did not step onto that bare ground. He told himself it was because he wanted a better angle, a wider view. But the truth, he admitted later, was that he could not bring himself to walk on it. The ground felt wrong, not soft, not unstable, just wrong, like walking on a floor that you knew had nothing beneath it, like the earth was thin there, stretched over something hollow and vast, and if you put your full weight on it, it might give. He took out his ledger and sketched the clearing, the stone, the ring of dark trees. He noted the compass bearing and estimated his distance from the truck. 12 miles, maybe 13. He was deep, deeper than the survey required, deeper than any job called for. He should turn back. He turned back, and that was when he realized something that sent a cold wire of panic through his chest. His compass was not working right. The needle was moving, not spinning, just drifting, slowly, back and forth, like it could not decide where north was. He tapped the glass. He held it level. He turned in a full circle. The needle followed him for a quarter turn and then wandered off in the wrong direction. He had never seen a compass do that. Not in 15 years. Not in any terrain. Not near any deposit of iron or magnetite. A compass Either worked or it did not. This one was trying to work and failing, like a dog pulling against a leash that kept jerking it in different directions. Orin closed the compass. He put it in his pocket. He looked up at the canopy and tried to find the sun. The light was diffuse, scattered by the thick weave of branches overhead. He could not tell east from west. He picked a direction that felt right, based on the slope of the ground and the vague sense of where he had come from, and started walking. Have you ever been truly lost? Not the kind of lost where you missed a turn and you know the road is somewhere behind you. I mean lost, where every direction looks the same and the ground gives you nothing to go on, and the sky is just a gray blur above the trees, and your own footprints disappear in the dead leaves before you have gone 10 paces. If you have, tell me about it in the comments. Because what Orin felt in that moment was something most people will never understand. The absolute gut-level knowledge that you do not know where you are and the land around you does not care. He walked for the rest of the afternoon. The ravine did not end. The trees did not thin. The terrain rose and fell in ways that did not match his memory of the walk in. He crossed a dry creek bed 3 times, and each time he was not sure if it was the same one or a different one. The stones in the creek bed looked the same. The angle of the banks looked the same. Everything looked the same, and that sameness was worse than any landmark, because it meant there was nothing to orient by, nothing to hold on to, nothing to tell him he was making progress in any direction. The marks on the trees were everywhere now, on every 3rd or 4th trunk, always at the same height, always the same pattern. He stopped looking at them. He did not want to count them. By late afternoon, he came to another clearing. The same clearing. He knew it was the same one because of the stone, that flat rectangular stone set flush with the bare gray earth. He stood at the edge of the tree line and stared at it, and the cold wire in his chest tightened into a knot. He had been walking southwest for 5 or 6 hours. He should have been miles away. He should have hit the creek, the logging road, the truck. But here he was, standing exactly where he had stood at noon, looking at the same stone, the same ring of dark trees, the same bare ground that felt like it had nothing underneath it. He checked his pocket watch. 4:27 in the afternoon. He wound it. It was still running. The compass was still drifting. He sat down at the edge of the clearing. He ate a strip of dried beef and a piece of hardtack. He drank half his canteen. He tried to think clearly the way his father had taught him. When you are lost, you stop. You stay put. You wait for morning, and you use the sun. Simple. Practical. The kind of advice that works in a place that follows rules. Orin was no longer sure this place followed rules. He thought about the marks on the trees. He thought about the perfect circle of the clearing and the flat stone that looked placed rather than deposited. He thought about the compass needle drifting back and forth like something indecisive. And he thought about the tapping, that slow, deliberate tapping in the dark, patient and steady, like someone working at something they intended to finish no matter how long it took. Night came faster than it should have. The light did not fade gradually the way it does in open country. It just went. One moment there was a thin gray glow in the canopy, and the next there was nothing. Blackness, complete, heavy, pressing against his face like cloth. He sat with his back against a tree at the edge of the clearing. He did not build a fire. He did not unroll his blanket. He just sat, with his knees drawn up and his hands resting on them, and he waited. The smell came back. Damp stone, sealed air, cold. It rolled in from the clearing like a tide, slow and heavy, and it brought with it that deep, underground chill that settled into his bones and stayed there. And then the tapping, tap, 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 the same slow rhythm. But closer now, not 20 yards, maybe 10, maybe less, coming from the clearing, coming from near the stone. Orin opened his eyes. He could see nothing. The darkness was total, no starlight, no moonlight, nothing. But he could feel it, a presence. Something in that clearing, near the stone, doing something he could not see. The tapping was steady, unhurried, like a craftsman at work, like someone carving. He sat there all night. He did not sleep. He did not move. His back pressed against the rough bark of the tree, and his hands gripped his own knees, and he stared into the blackness and listened. The tapping continued for hours, pausing occasionally, then starting again. Sometimes it was slow, sometimes it quickened, the rhythm tightening, becoming almost urgent, before settling back to its steady pace. And all through the night, the smell held, thick and cold and ancient, like something pulled from deep underground, like air that had been sealed in stone since before anything alive had drawn breath. When dawn came, the tapping stopped. The smell faded. Orin stood up. His legs were stiff, his back ached, his hands were cramped from gripping his knees all night. He walked into the clearing. The stone was different. The top surface, which had been smooth and bare the day before, was now covered in marks. The same pattern he had seen on the trees. Thin, precise lines, carved into the rock in tight, repeating rows. Fresh. The dust from the carving still lay in the grooves, pale against the gray stone. He could see where the lines began and where they ended, and the precision of them was staggering. No human hand could have been this steady. No chisel could have been this fine. The grooves were barely wider than a hair, cut into hard stone with a consistency that spoke of something other than effort, something mechanical, something ancient. He knelt beside it. He ran his finger along one of the lines. The groove was clean, sharp, made by something hard and pointed, wielded with care and a patience beyond anything he could comprehend. He looked around the clearing. The bare ground was undisturbed. No footprints, no tracks, no sign that anything had been there. But something had been there. He had heard it. He had smelled it. He had felt it, the weight of its presence pressing against the dark like a hand against a window. Orin stood up. He looked at the canopy. The light was coming from the east. He marked it. He picked up his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked west. He walked west all morning. He kept the light at his back, and he did not look at his compass. He stepped over the tangled roots and pushed through the deadfall, and he did not look at the marks on the trees. He just walked, one foot in front of the other, steady, the way his father had taught him, and every hour he came back to the clearing. 3 times that morning, 3 times he broke through the tree line and saw that stone, that flat gray rectangle, now covered in those carved lines. Each time from a different direction, each time after walking steadily, purposefully, away from it. The first time, he felt confusion. The second time, something closer to disbelief. The third time, he felt nothing at all, just a flat, quiet acceptance that he was somewhere that did not work the way the world was supposed to work. The third time, he stopped at the edge and stood there for a long while. He was not panicking. Orin was not a man who panicked, but he felt something worse than panic. He felt certain. Certain that he was not going to leave this place by walking. Certain that the rules he had trusted his entire life, compass and sun and distance and direction, did not apply here. Certain that whatever was keeping him here had been doing this for a long time and was very, very patient. He sat down again. He ate the last of his dried beef. He drank most of his water. He took out his ledger and wrote a short entry. The date. His location, as best as he could estimate. A note about the stone and the marks and the clearing that kept finding him. He wrote it plainly, without drama, the way a man writes a report he does not expect anyone to believe. Then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He prayed, not to any particular God, not with any particular words. He just closed his eyes and asked quietly to be shown the way out. He sat with his eyes closed for several minutes. The silence pressed against him. The cold rose from the ground beneath him. He could feel his heartbeat in his wrists and in his neck. When he opened his eyes, the light in the canopy had shifted. The sun had moved, or something had moved, but there was a gap in the trees to the south that had not been there before. A narrow gap, barely wider than his shoulders, where the dark bark trunks parted just enough to let a thin blade of sunlight through. Real sunlight, warm, golden. The first warm light he had seen in 2 days. He got up and walked toward it. The gap led into a passage between 2 ridges, steep on both sides, with loose shale underfoot and thin, scraggly pines clinging to the slopes. It was nothing like the forest he had been lost in. The air was different, warmer, alive. He could hear a crow somewhere above him, and the sound of it, harsh and real, almost brought him to his knees. He stopped and just listened to it. That ugly, ordinary sound, the most welcome thing he had ever heard. He walked that passage for 2 hours. It climbed gradually, switched backing up the side of a ridge, and when he reached the top, he could see the valley spread out below him, green and gold in the late afternoon light, farmland in the distance, a thread of road, and there, maybe 3 miles away at the end of a dirt road, was his truck. He got back to the truck at dusk. He sat in the cab for a long time, just breathing, just feeling the leather of the seat and the metal of the steering wheel under his hands. Real things, solid things, things that belonged to the world he knew. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. Not a lot, just enough to notice. The hands that had held a compass and a ledger and a folding knife without trembling were shaking now, in the safety of his own truck, with the engine off and the world silent and ordinary around him. He drove back to Fayetteville that night. He did not stop. He did not turn off the headlights. He drove with the windows up and the engine loud, and he did not look in the mirror, not once. Now, here is where the story gets stranger, and I know that seems hard to believe, given what I have already told you, but stay with me. Orin filed his report with Carroll Lumber the next morning. He told them the parcel was inaccessible, the boundary markers were missing, and he recommended they abandon the survey. They were not happy, but they accepted it. The foreman, a man named Pershing Colquitt, 51 years old, thick through the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been shaped by years of argument and weather, asked Orin what had happened out there. Not in a formal way, just a question man to man, over coffee in his office with the door closed. Orin told him the truth, the compass failure, the silence, the clearing, the stone, the marks, the tapping. Pershing listened. He did not interrupt. He did not raise an eyebrow or shift in his chair. He just listened, with his coffee growing cold in his hand, the way a man listens when he has heard pieces of this story before and is waiting to see how this version ends. When Orin was finished, Pershing leaned back in his chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose with two thick fingers, and he said something Orin did not expect. He said, "You are not the first." Pershing told him that the Caro Company had sent 2 other surveyors into that parcel over the previous 5 years. The first, a man named Fennick Grail, 34, lean and quiet, with a scar across his left knuckle from a logging accident, had gone in during the spring of 1922 and come back after 5 days instead of 3. He refused to talk about what had happened. He filed no report. He quit the company 2 weeks later and moved to a town in central Missouri. Pershing had written to him twice. Both letters came back unopened. The second, a woman named Cressida Voss, 29, a surveyor from Little Rock with a reputation for precision and a no-nonsense manner that had earned her respect in a trade that did not often welcome women, had gone in during the summer of 1925. She came back after 4 days. She filed a normal report, nothing unusual, parcel surveyed, markers in place, board feet estimated. But when Pershing checked her work against the maps, nothing matched. The distances were wrong. The compass bearings were off. The boundary markers she described were not in any of the locations the company had on file. It was as if she had surveyed a completely different piece of land. A piece of land that did not exist on any map Pershing had ever seen. Pershing had tried to contact her afterward. She did not return his letters. He called the surveying office in Little Rock and was told she had taken a leave of absence. She never came back to work. When Orin asked how far back the company's records on that parcel went, Pershing opened a filing cabinet in the corner of his office and pulled out a folder that was thicker than Orin expected. Dog-eared, coffee-stained, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. The earliest entry was from 1909, a survey request from a logging outfit called Briar Notch Timber. The surveyor's name was Jedediah Toole, age 53. His report was 2 sentences long. Parcel unfit for survey. Do not return. There were 6 more entries after that, spanning 18 years. Different surveyors, different companies, different seasons, and every single one of them had come back with the same basic story. Compass failure, silence, disorientation, and inability to leave the area by normal means. 3 of them mentioned a clearing. 2 mentioned a stone. 1, a surveyor named Virgil Oates, who went in during the fall of 1914, had written a note in the margin of his report that read, "The trees are marked. Someone has been here. Someone keeps coming back." None of them mentioned the tapping. Orin was the only one. He did not know what to do with that information. He went home. He sat in his kitchen for a long time, looking at the wall, turning his pocket watch over and over in his hands. He tried to sleep. He could not because of nightmares. He did not have nightmares. He simply could not close his eyes without hearing it. That slow, steady tapping, tap, 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 like a fingernail on wood, like someone working in the dark with the patience of decades. It was not menacing exactly. It was not threatening. It was just there, constant, unwavering, like a heartbeat that did not belong to him. He lasted 2 weeks before he went back. He told no one. He drove out to the same logging road, parked his truck at the same washed-out creek crossing, and started walking. He carried the same pack, the same compass, the same blanket. But this time he also carried a lantern, a kerosene lantern with a full reservoir and a new wick, the glass clean and the brass fittings polished. The forest swallowed him again within the first mile. The oaks gave way to the dark-barked trees. The birds stopped. The silence settled over him like a blanket, heavy and complete. And the marks were there on every trunk at chest height, carved in that tight, repeating pattern. He did not stop to examine them this time. He knew what they looked like. He kept walking. He found the clearing in 3 hours, faster than before, as if the forest had shortened the distance for him, as if it knew he was coming and did not see the point in making him wander. It was waiting for him. The stone was there, covered in those carved lines, and the bare gray earth stretched out around it, smooth and untouched. The ring of dark trees stood silent and still. This time, Orin stepped onto it. The ground was cold, not from the air, from below. He could feel it through the soles of his boots, a deep, steady cold that radiated up through the earth like heat from a stove, only inverted. It traveled up through his legs and settled in his stomach, a cold that was not uncomfortable, but was unmistakably present, like standing over a well that went deeper than you could see. He walked to the stone and knelt beside it. He ran his hands over the carved surface. The lines were denser than before, more intricate. The pattern had grown since his last visit 2 weeks ago, as if the carving had continued every night without pause. New lines overlaid old ones, creating layers of meaning he could not read, but could somehow feel, like music in a language he did not speak. He sat down beside the stone and waited for night. It came the way it had before, not gradually, all at once. The light simply ended, and the dark moved in like water filling a basin. The smell rose, damp stone, sealed air, that ancient underground cold, and the tapping began. But this time Orin lit the lantern. The flame was small and yellow. It threw a circle of light maybe 10 feet across, flickering against the bare ground and catching the carved lines on the stone, making them look deeper than they were, making the shadows between them move. He held it up slowly and turned to face the sound. What he saw he described only once to Pershing Colquitt 3 days later, sitting in Pershing's office with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. And the way Pershing told it afterward, to the very few people he ever shared this with, was that Orin did not look frightened when he told it. He looked tired, the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep, the kind of tired that comes from seeing something your mind was not built to hold and having to carry it anyway. At the edge of the lantern light, standing at the far side of the clearing, there was a figure, tall, taller than any person Orin had ever seen, by a foot, maybe more, thin, but not frail, thin the way a tree is thin, vertical, rigid. It stood with its arms at its sides, and its fingers, which were long, longer than fingers should be, hung motionless near its knees. It was facing Orin, or at least It was oriented toward him. He could not be certain it had a face. The light did not reach that far with any clarity. He could see the shape of it, the outline, the way it stood against the deeper darkness of the trees behind it. But the details blurred, as if the air between them refused to carry the light all the way. It was not moving, and then it was, not walking, not stepping, just closer. One moment it was at the far edge of the clearing, and the next it was 5 feet nearer, like a picture someone had slid across a table. No transition, no motion, just a shift in position, as if it had always been standing there, and Orin's memory of it being farther away was the thing that was wrong. Orin held the lantern steady. His hand was not shaking. He told Pershing that clearly twice. His hand was not shaking. He was calm in a way that did not make sense. Calm the way a man is calm when he has passed through fear and come out the other side into something quieter. Something like recognition. The figure shifted again, closer. Now it was near the stone. Now Orin could see more. The surface of it, the skin or whatever it was, looked like bark, dark, ridged, faintly wet, with the same deep furrows he had seen on the trees around the clearing. The fingers were not fingers. They were too smooth, too uniform, tapering to points that gleamed dully in the lantern light like polished stone. And from one of those points a thin line of pale dust fell, drifting down to the surface of the stone. The same dust he had seen in the grooves of the carving. It was carving. That was the tapping. Those fingers, tapping against the stone, cutting lines into the rock with a patience that spanned years, decades, maybe longer. The same way the marks had been cut into the trees, the same pattern, the same steady, deliberate rhythm. Not art, not writing, something else. Orin looked at the stone between them. He looked at the lines. And in that moment, in the flickering yellow light of the lantern, the pattern finally made sense to him. Not in a way he could explain, not in a way he could draw or describe, but he understood it the way you understand a word in a language you have never studied, the way you understand a face you have never seen but somehow know. It was not writing. It was not a picture. It was a map of something below the ground, something vast, something that went deeper than the stone, deeper than the roots of those dark trees, deeper than the rock and the clay and the water table, deeper than anything he had a word for, a map of a place that existed underneath the world he knew, drawn by something that had been here since before the trees, since before the hills, since before anyone had ever thought to draw a map of anything, a record of something below, kept by something above, with a patience that made human time feel like a held breath. The figure did not move again. It stood there near the stone, with its long fingers hanging still, and Orin sat there, holding his lantern, and they stayed like that until the light came back. Hours. Neither of them moved. Neither of them made a sound. The lantern burned low, the flame shrinking as the kerosene ran out, and the circle of light tightened around Orin like a fist, and still they stayed. When dawn broke, the figure was gone. The clearing was empty. The stone was the same, covered in those carved lines, and the bare earth was undisturbed. Orin stood up. His legs ached. His eyes burned. His lantern was cold and empty. He picked up his pack and walked south. This time, the forest let him go. He reached the truck in 4 hours. He drove to Fayetteville without stopping. He went straight to Pershing's office and told him what he had seen. Pershing listened. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, writing in his careful, blocky hand. He locked the notes in his filing cabinet in the same folder with all the other reports from that parcel. And then he looked at Orin and said, "I am going to recommend that the company sell that parcel, and I am going to recommend that whoever buys it never sends anyone in there again." Orin agreed. He went home. He sat in his kitchen for a long time looking at his hands. They were not shaking anymore. He took out his pocket watch, the one with "Walk Steady" inscribed on the back, and wound it. He listened to it tick, steady, reliable, a machine that measured time the way time was supposed to work. He went to bed, and for the first time in 2 weeks, he slept. But that was not the end of it. Over the following months, Orin noticed things, small things, the kind of things you might dismiss if you had not seen what he had seen. The pattern he had seen on the stone, the one he had understood without being able to explain, it showed up in places it should not have been. In the grain of the wood at his workbench, in the cracks of the plaster on his bedroom wall, in the frost on his windows on cold mornings, in the way dried mud cracked on his boots after a rain, always the same tight, repeating lines, always just at the edge of recognition. He would blink, and it would be gone, and the wood was just wood, and the plaster was just plaster, and the frost was just frost. But for a moment, every time, he could feel it, that cold, rising up from somewhere far below, that ancient, patient underground cold. He started drawing, not the pattern itself. He could not reproduce it. His hand would not cooperate. Every time he tried, the pencil went somewhere he did not intend, and what ended up on the paper was just scribble, formless and wrong. But he drew the clearing, the stone, the trees, the figure, over and over on scraps of paper, on the backs of survey reports, on the margins of his ledger. Always the same scene, always from the same angle, as if he were trying to fix it in place, to keep the memory from shifting the way memories do, to make sure he never forgot what he had seen, even as his mind tried to make it smaller, safer, easier to carry. Pershing Colquitt checked on him from time to time, stopped by his house on a Sunday, or met him for coffee at the diner on Main Street. Orin always said he was fine, and he was, mostly. He went back to work. He surveyed other parcels in other parts of the Ozarks, and he did his job well. But he never went east of Briar Notch again, and he never walked into a forest without first standing at the edge and listening for silence. In the spring of 1928, Orin received a letter. It came to his house, slid through the mail slot, lying face down on the hallway floor when he got home from work. It had no return address. The postmark was smudged beyond reading, just a blur of black ink on a yellowed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, drawn in pencil with extraordinary precision, was the pattern. The same pattern from the stone, the same pattern from the trees, every line, every curve, every repeating element, reproduced with a steadiness that no human hand should have been able to achieve. The lines were fine and clean, without a single waver, without a single correction. Whoever had drawn it had done it perfectly on the first attempt, without hesitation. There was no note, no name, no explanation. Orin looked at the drawing for a long time. He sat at his kitchen table and held it under the lamp and traced the lines with his eyes, and for a moment The understanding came back, the way it had in the clearing, the knowledge of what the pattern meant, what it mapped, what lay beneath. And then it was gone, like a word on the tip of his tongue, and he was just a man looking at lines on paper. He folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of his coat, next to his father's watch. He carried it there for the rest of his life. He never found out who sent it. He never went back to the clearing. But Pershing, years later, after he had retired from Caro Lumber and moved to a small house outside Eureka Springs, told this story to a neighbor over a glass of whiskey one evening in the fall of 1949. The neighbor, a retired postal worker named Odell Sumter, 67 years old, with white hair and hands that still bore the calluses of decades of sorting mail, sat quietly through the whole thing. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. He just listened, the way Pershing had listened to Orin all those years ago, with the patience of a man who has been waiting to hear something he already knew. And when Pershing was finished, Odell set down his glass and said something that made Pershing set down his. He said, "I know that place." Odell had grown up in the hills east of Briar Notch. His grandfather had homesteaded there in the 1880s, cleared land, built a cabin, raised hogs and corn on a strip of bottomland that barely made enough to feed a family. And according to Odell, his grandfather had told him, when Odell was a young man of about 20, that there was a place in those woods that you did not go, a place where the trees were different, and the ground was bare, and there was a stone in the center of a clearing that had been there since before anyone could remember. His grandfather called it the counting place. He did not know why. He did not know what was being counted. He just knew that the old people, the ones who had been in those hills before his grandfather, the ones whose names had been forgotten, they had known about it, and they had stayed away, not because they were afraid exactly, because they understood that what was happening there was not for them to see. Pershing asked Odell if his grandfather had ever heard the tapping. Odell looked at him for a long time. The evening light was fading outside the window, and the room was getting dim, and the whiskey sat untouched between them. Then he said, "Everyone who goes in there hears it eventually. Most of them just do not stay long enough to hear it the first night. My grandfather said you had to be still, really still, and then it comes." Pershing asked what it was. Odell finished his whiskey. He set the glass down on the table between them with a soft click, and he said, "My grandfather believed it was keeping track." Of what, I could not tell you. He never said, or maybe he did not know. But he said the marks on the stone were a record, and the thing in the clearing was the one keeping it. And it had been keeping it since before the hills were hills, since before there were people in these valleys, since before there were valleys at all. Pershing went home that night and lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the folder in his old filing cabinet, the one with 6 survey reports and Orin's account, and the 2-sentence note from Jedediah Toole. He thought about Fenwick Grawl, who had quit and moved to Missouri and returned 2 letters unopened. He thought about Cressida Voss, who had surveyed a piece of land that did not exist and then disappeared from her own life. He thought about Virgil Oates, who had noticed the marks and written his careful note in the margin. He thought about Orin, who carried a folded piece of paper in his coat pocket and never spoke about what was drawn on it. And he thought about the stone. He wondered what would happen when the carving was finished, when every line had been cut and every groove had been filled, when whatever was being counted had finally been counted and the record was complete. He did not know. He suspected no one did. He suspected the thing in the clearing did not think about it in terms of finishing. It just continued, night after night, year after year, century after century, the way a river continues, the way stone continues, without intention, without hurry, without end. He did not sleep well that night, or the next, or the one after that. Orin Whitgrove died in 1953 at the age of 64 in his home in Fayetteville. He died quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday night in October, 26 years to the month after he walked into those woods for the first time. When they found him the next morning, he was lying on his back with his hands folded on his chest, the way a man lies when he has been expecting something and has decided to meet it calmly. His pocket watch was resting on the nightstand beside him. The watch had stopped at 3:17 in the morning. In his coat, hanging on the back of his bedroom door, they found the folded piece of paper, the drawing, the pattern. A family member who did not know what it was, who had never heard the story, who had never heard of Briar Notch, or the counting place, or the thing that carved in the dark, looked at it for a moment and threw it away. Pershing Colquitt died in 1960 in Eureka Springs. His filing cabinet, with the Briar Notch folder still inside, was sold at a state auction to a man from Tulsa who was buying old furniture for resale. Whether the folder survived, whether it sits in some attic or basement or second-hand shop, whether anyone has ever opened it and read the reports inside, no one knows. Odell Sumter died in 1963. His grandfather's cabin in the hills east of Briar Notch had fallen in years before, the logs rotting, the roof collapsed, reclaimed by the forest the way the forest reclaims everything given enough time. The parcel east of Briar Notch was never sold. It sits in a legal gray area owned technically by a company that no longer exists, in a county that reclassified it as unusable land in 1931. No roads lead to it, no trails cross it. It does not appear in any guidebook, any hiking map, any tourism brochure. On modern maps, it is simply a blank space in the hills, green and unnamed, indistinguishable from the thousands of acres of forest around it. But the trees are still there, the dark-barked ones, with roots that run above the ground, and the marks are still in the bark, old ones nearly swallowed, new ones still fresh and pale, and the clearing is still there, with its bare gray earth and its flat rectangular stone, covered in a pattern that has been growing for longer than anyone alive can remember. And at night, if you were to stand at the edge of that clearing and hold very still and listen past your own breathing and your own heartbeat and the blood moving through your own veins, you might hear it. Tap, 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 slow, steady, patient, still counting, still not finished. Orin never told anyone what the pattern meant. Not Pershing, not anyone. He understood it that night, in the lantern light, kneeling beside the stone with the figure standing above him. He understood what was being counted and why, and he chose, deliberately, to never speak of it. Because some things, once spoken, become real in a way they were not before. And some knowledge is not meant to be carried by more than one person at a time. He walked steady, just like his father told him. He walked steady all the way to the end. And somewhere in the Ozarks, in a clearing that no map will ever show you, something is still working, still carving, still keeping its record in stone, waiting to finish. And do you believe there are things in this world that were here before us and will still be here long after we are gone? Things that do not care whether we understand them or not. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you know a story like this one, something that happened to you or someone you trust, share it with us. It might just become our next video. Stay with us for the next tale. Until next time.